Today we will review the left side documentation checklist, which, effective March 1st, 2021, is one of the General Land Office's required documents for voluntary buyout or acquisition programs. A hyperlink to the left side checklist can be found on the Texas General Land Office website at recovery.texas.gov. To locate the document, go to the local buyout and acquisition program page, which is linked below in the description section of this video. Scroll down to the left side checklist section and click on the link for left side documentation checklist. Once you click on the link, your computer will download the fillable document. Please note you will need Microsoft Excel to view and edit this document. Subrecipients are required to complete the left side documentation checklist to check off and document that all required documentation is filed according to the requirements of the Voluntary Buyout and Acquisition Program. Voluntary buyout and acquisition programs are required to have a complete file in the left side, right side format for all applicants to the program. The file should be created based on the property address. Therefore, there may be several files for the same applicant if they apply for more than one property to the program. Involuntary buyout and acquisition programs may have many, but not all of the same requirements. Therefore, involuntary buyout and acquisition programs should use the involuntary left side and right side checklist. The left side of the file should include all required documents and information found in the left side documentation checklist. The right side file should contain all documents and information found in the right side documentation checklist. Subrecipients will be required to upload documents into Tiger in this format for each eligible applicant. In addition, subrecipient files may be monitored to ensure that they are being maintained in this order and that they contain all required documentation. For this video, I'll use an example of a fictional applicant and location to explain the left side documentation checklist. All of the required GLO and HUD forms have separate instructional videos that can be found in the location that you are viewing this one. These videos have more in-depth detail on how to complete the forms. The first section of the checklist is for the information on the homeowner and the buyout or acquisition property that the file is being created for. The subrecipient will input the homeowner name. This should be the name of the principal applicant on the intake beneficiary form. Then, the subrecipient will input the subrecipient name and Tiger project number for the buyout or acquisition property. The project number will be created in Tiger once the applicant is uploaded in Tiger. The subrecipient will also include the address of the buyout or acquisition property divided by street, city, zip code, and county. Note, this may be different than the homeowner's current address. However, in this section, subrecipients should input the buyout or acquisition property address. In the next section of the form, subrecipients will input the program type and activities. First, subrecipients will check if the program is a voluntary buyout or voluntary acquisition program. Voluntary buyout programs are required to have an end use with a land use covenant that dedicates and maintains the property in perpetuity for a use that is compatible with open space, recreational, floodplain, or wetlands management practices. Voluntary acquisition programs may redevelop on the acquired property. However, they will have to follow elevation, building, and insurance requirements. The program type should adhere to the program type and end use that was defined in the subrecipient's housing guidelines. Note, the checklist is applicable only to voluntary programs. Involuntary programs have additional requirements and will have a separate set of required documents and file structure. Robert is participating in a voluntary buyout program, so the subrecipient checked voluntary buyout. Next, subrecipients will select the national objective of the activities that this homeowner will be performing. HUD national objectives include low to moderate housing, also known as LMH. LMH is any activity that involves the buyout, acquisition, or rehabilitation of property to provide housing or improve permanent residential structures that will, upon completion, benefit and must be occupied by low and moderate income households. Low and moderate income households, also known as LMI, are households whose adjusted gross income does not exceed 80% of the area median income. Income eligibility will be determined using the adjusted gross income, AGI, and area median income verification calculator that will be explained in another video. Low to moderate buyout, also known as LMB. LMB is used for a buyout award to acquire housing owned by a qualifying low and moderate income household where the award amount, including incentives, is greater than the post-disaster or current fair market value of that property. Low to moderate housing incentive, also known as LMHI. LMHI benefits are used for a housing incentive award tied to the voluntary buyout or other voluntary acquisition of housing owned by a qualifying LMI household for the purpose of moving outside of the affected floodplain or to a lower risk area, or when the housing incentive is for the purpose of providing or improving residential structures that, upon completion, will be occupied by an LMI household. Urgent need, also known as UN, an urgent need that exists because conditions pose serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community. Subrecipients must document how each program and/or activity funded under this category responds to a disaster-related impact. Slum and blight, also known as SB, activities which help to eliminate slum and blighted conditions. Slum and blight activities must meet the criteria of one of the three following categories: prevent or eliminate slum and blight on an area basis, prevent or eliminate slum and blight on a spot basis, or be in an urban renewal area. The program that Robert is participating in is a voluntary buyout program, and his family is an LMI household, so he will be participating in the LMB national objective, and he will also be receiving incentives, so he will also be participating in the LMHI program. The next section of the checklist includes the list of required documents that each file must have for each property. The file should be organized in the order that is identified in the checklist. On the checklist, the required documents are grouped into document sections, and under each section, there is information on required documentation and the name of the GLO form or information that is required to be in the file. Then, there is a column for the subrecipient to mark whether the requested document or form in that row is included in the file by marking yes, it is included, no, it is not included, or NA, that form or document is not applicable to this applicant. Finally, there is a column for comments on any of the required documents or forms. A best practice is to include the page number or page range of the required document listed in that row in the comments column to make it easier for the reviewer to find. The first required document that should be at the top of the file is the completed left side documentation checklist. All sections of the checklist should be completed. Under the Applicant Information section, the first required document is the Intake Beneficiary Application. All applicants of voluntary buyout and acquisition programs must submit an Intake Beneficiary Application and have the application in their file. On the checklist, there are two rows of requirements for the Intake Beneficiary Application: the GLO form Intake Beneficiary Application and the Homeowner Certification and Agreement to Participate. For more information on the Intake Beneficiary Application and how to complete it, please refer to the Intake Beneficiary Application instructional video on this page. The Homeowner Certification and Agreement to Participate is included with the Intake Beneficiary Application form itself. By signing the Intake Beneficiary Application, the homeowner is agreeing to participate in the voluntary program. Therefore, no additional documentation is needed. Subrecipients should ensure that all sections of the Intake Beneficiary Application have been filled out and signed by the applicant and all co-applicants prior to placing in the file. For our example form, the subrecipient input the Intake Beneficiary Application in the file on pages 2 through 20 and marked yes for both the Intake Beneficiary Application and Homeowner Certification requirements, and in the comments section, they input the page numbers that each document can be found in the PDF file document they have created. In number 2, under Applicant Information, the subrecipient is required to include documentation that the subrecipient is complying with early notification requirements for the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act, also known as URA. The relocation requirements of the URA only are required for voluntary buyout and acquisition properties with tenants living in them. In the Intake Beneficiary Application Section 7, the applicant noted if the property is a rental property. If the applicant selected that yes, the property is a rental property, then the subrecipient should immediately revise and send out the HUD Guide Form General Information Notice Residential Tenant to be Displaced, also known as GIN, to the tenants with an attached HUD brochure, Relocation Assistance to Tenants Displaced from Their Homes. See the instructional video for information on the GIN and attached brochure. On the checklist, the subrecipient should place a copy of the letter that was sent in the file and select yes, no, or NA for whether it was included and any notes for the file. For our example, the property is not a rental property, so the subrecipient marked NA and in the comments wrote not a rental property to clarify the NA response. Also required under this row is the evidence of delivery of the GIN. The General Information Notice should be sent to homeowners via certified mail or return receipt requested with evidence of the delivery placed in the file. Or subrecipients may hand deliver the notification with certification from the tenant that it was received and noted in the case file must be the date and time that it was delivered. In number 3, the subrecipient is required to input all of the required affidavit of same name forms for the applicants. The affidavit of same name is a GLO form that must be completed for all applicants and co-applicants of the program. See the instructional video on the affidavit of same name form for more information on how to complete the form. Subrecipients should mark yes, no, and NA for whether the form is in the file and any comments on the form itself. In our example, 2 affidavit of same name forms were completed, one for the applicant and one for the co-applicant. They marked yes on the checklist and included the pages the affidavits can be found in the comments section. In number 4, the subrecipient is required to file documentation providing evidence that the buyout or acquisition property received direct damage from the disaster. All buyout and acquisition properties are required to have received direct damage from the disaster to be eligible for the program. Methods of documenting damage from the disaster include damage or insurance estimates, FEMA award or denial letters or data, SBA award or denial letters or data, other funds award or denial letters or data, the GLO form damage assessment checklist. These documents should be dated with the damage corresponding to the disaster event. The documents should also include language of the damages that the property incurred as a result of the disaster. Note: the GLO form damage assessment checklist is only required if the tie to the disaster cannot be provided through the additional funding documentation listed. For information on how to complete the damage assessment checklist, see the instructional video on the form. For our example, the subrecipient input in the file the applicant's insurance claim detailing the list of damages as the disaster damage verification. For the first row, they input yes, and the page numbers where the disaster documentation is in the file. In the row for the damage assessment checklist, they put NA, and in the comments column, they explain the NA that the disaster damage verification was provided through the insurance claim. In number 5, the subrecipient should input documentation that demonstrates that the applicant is current on court-ordered child support payments. Subrecipients should confirm with applicants if they are required to pay court-ordered child support. On page 3 of the Intake Beneficiary Application, the applicant will indicate if they are in good standing or not if they are required to pay child support. If the applicant marked anything other than NA not applicable, it can be assumed that they are required to pay child support and this row on the checklist is applicable. Documentation should be provided in the file on the status of court-ordered child support as verified through the Texas Office of Attorney General, and/or proof of an established child support payment plan. Subrecipients are responsible for following up with the Attorney General Office to determine that applicants are in good standing with their child support payments. Documentation of good standing may include a record of the time and date and manner in which the communication occurred with the AG's office. If the applicant is not in good standing on child support payments, evidence should be added to the file that the applicant is working with the Attorney General's office to establish a payment plan. Once a payment plan is established, this will also need to be added to the file prior to eligibility of the applicant. If they are not required to pay child support, subrecipients can place an NA on this row. For our example, the subrecipient reviewed the application and confirmed with the applicant that they had no child support obligation and input NA, no child support obligation. In number 6, subrecipients must place documentation supporting the national objective for the buyout or acquisition property. All households of the buyout and acquisition program must complete the GLO form, Adjusted Gross Income, AGI, and Area Median Income, AMI, verification. This form should include the names of all household members of the household, regardless of income or lack of. In addition, the income details must be provided for each member of the household that is recorded as having income. It is not enough to just put the total income. The income breakdown and backup documentation is needed for the household. See the instructional video on how to complete the Adjusted Gross Income and Area Median Income verification form. The AGI and AMI verification form will assist the subrecipient in collecting income documentation and identifying if the household is considered a low to moderate income family. If the household is not an LMI household, the subrecipient will need to justify the use of the urgent need or slum and blight national objective by inputting in the file either the GLO form, Urgent Need National Objective Self-Certification Form, or the GLO form, Slum and Blight National Objective Self-Certification Form. See the instructional videos on how to complete the Urgent Need National Objective and Slum and Blight National Objective Self-Certification Forms. On the left side checklist, the subrecipient will input yes, no, or NA if they added the documents and any comments they have. For our example, the applicant completed the AGI and AMI verification form, and the subrecipient placed it in the file and marked yes and commented that it is page 30 through 35 in the file. Then, because the applicant household was determined to be LMI and using the LMI national objective, the subrecipient placed NA on the Urgent Need and Slum and Blight self-certification forms and commented that it is NA because it is an LMI household. In number 7, subrecipients should input documentation of verification of disability or special needs. This form is not required for all applicants. If in the subrecipient's program guidelines, they have identified special needs that prioritize the application in a prioritization schedule, and the applicant has identified in Section 6 of the Intake Beneficiary Application Form as having special needs, such as those in the prioritization schedule, then the subrecipient should request documentation of the special needs. Subrecipients that have special needs as a prioritization factor in eligibility according to their program guidelines must have documentation of those needs in order to be eligible for prioritization. Acceptable documentation that can be provided in this section includes a mobility impaired ID card, a letter from the doctor stating homeowner or household member qualifies as disabled, a Social Security disability notice. For our example, the applicant had no special needs or disability, so the subrecipient placed NA in that row and commented that there are no disability or special needs. In number 8, the subrecipient is required to input all documentation providing evidence of additional funding received due to the disaster or subsequent disasters for the buyout or acquisition property that may cause a duplication of benefit, and evidence of all expenses spent for the purpose provided to reduce the duplication of benefit. There are several required GLO forms and documentation that should be provided to support the DOB or lack thereof. First, all applicant files must contain the GLO DOB calculation form. Any applicant that will receive pre-disaster value on their home, incentives, or is in a match program will have to fill out the form in its entirety to demonstrate that the total assistance received for the purpose of disaster recovery of the home is less than or equal to the total need. If an applicant has multiple properties they are applying for buyout, they will have to fill out the form for each property and be specific about how much of each assistance award is going to that specific address. The few applicants that are receiving post-disaster value on the home and will not receive any incentives and are not in a FEMA or SBA match program for the buyout of the home will only have to complete Section 1 and Section 2, Number 1 and Section 3. The GLO recognizes that the completion of this form in its entirety is a phased approach. Initially, the subrecipient will complete the form with the available information from the applicant and their application, using the application, backup documentation, assistance from the applicant, and tax assessor's website to complete the information in the form using estimated numbers. The subrecipient will then sign the form and place in the applicant's file. The form during this phase will be used for the eligibility review to work with the applicant to determine if the estimated value that can be offered to the homeowner is what they are looking for to participate in the program, and to determine eligibility based off duplication of benefit. When receiving the DOB calculation form and the maximum eligible amount with homeowners, subrecipients should also know the amount of outstanding liens on the home and provide guidance to ensure that the maximum eligible amount minus liens is an amount the homeowner is comfortable moving forward with. Later in the program, after the appraisal is complete and the subrecipient knows the final fair market value to be offered to the applicant, and the total assistance received has been confirmed through the eligibility review, the form will be updated with the final numbers and signed by the applicant, and another final copy will be placed in the file. For more information on how to complete the DOB calculation form, see the instructional video, DOB Calculation Form. If the applicant has indicated on the DOB calculation form that they have additional assistance and repairs have been made using that assistance, the GLO form, DOB Eligible Repairs Calculation Form, and backup documentation must be added to the file to document and calculate the eligible repairs made on the property that can be reduced from the duplication of benefit in the DOB calculation form. Eligible supporting documentation includes invoices and payments, proof of payment, inspection report that demonstrates damages before and after repair, before and after repair photos, self-certification statement of repairs. All supporting documentation for expenses should be written in a legible manner on the DOB Eligible Repairs Calculation Form so that the reviewer can easily identify the different invoices and receipts attached and can easily identify the eligible amounts on each receipt. Additional sheets should be added as necessary to identify and explain the eligible and ineligible amounts on each receipt if applicable. See the instructional video on the DOB Eligible Repairs Calculation Form for more information on how to complete the form. The next required GLO form in number 8 is the DOB Insurance Affidavit. All applicants of the local buyout or acquisition program, regardless of whether they had insurance or received a settlement or are receiving pre- or post-disaster value, are required to complete the duplication of benefits insurance affidavit certifying that they did or did not have insurance coverage and did or did not receive a claim or settlement payment. See the instructional video on how to complete the DOB insurance affidavit. The final row in the duplication of benefit documentation is that subrecipients should ensure that all backup documentation supporting additional assistance received should be in the file. The documentation should clearly demonstrate that the applicant received assistance for the same purpose for the same disaster or a subsequent disaster and the amount of funding received. If this documentation was already attached to the intake beneficiary application and is located with the intake beneficiary application, please make sure to note in the comments the location of the backup documentation. Finally, on the checklist, the subrecipient should mark yes, no, or NA if the required documentation is included and any comments on that documentation. In number 9 on the checklist, subrecipients must input the completed GLO form subrogation agreement. The subrogation agreement is the agreement defining the substitution of homeowners by the GLO in respect of a debt or insurance claim, accompanied by the transfer of any associated rights and duties regarding the specific property defined. Every applicant file should have a completed, signed, and dated copy of the subrogation agreement. See the instructional video on the subrogation agreement for more information on the form. After inputting the form in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the form and any comments on the form or its location. In the property documentation section, subrecipients will need to input all required property documentation and complete the checklist. In number 10, subrecipients should input a map clearly delineating the location of the property, including latitude and longitude coordinates, overlaid with the boundaries of the designated disaster risk reduction area as defined in the subrecipient's program guidelines or the floodplain or floodway. This map should clearly demonstrate that the buyout or acquisition property is located within a target area designated within the housing guidelines. Then, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the form and any comments on the form or its location. In number 11, subrecipients should include documentation supporting principal residency if applicable. In order to be eligible for incentives, applicants must prove current principal residency for the property. To prove principal residency, the file should include one or more of the following documents in the applicant's file: a most recent tax year, tax records with homestead exemption, utility bill, tax assessor's indication of homestead exemption. In our example, the applicant provided their 2020 tax records with the homestead exemption. The subrecipient marked yes on the checklist that the document was included, and in the comments input page 51 as the location of the record. In number 12, all applicants that have an outstanding mortgage on the home must file their most recent mortgage statement. The statement should include the outstanding amount owed on the mortgage. The subrecipient should work with the applicant to understand that the outstanding mortgage on the home is a lien that is owed on the home that will reduce the amount the homeowner will receive for the sale of their home, as the lien must be paid off at closing. Subrecipients should ensure that the maximum award amount listed on the DOB calculation form is greater than the debt left on the outstanding mortgage. Also, if the maximum award amount minus the outstanding mortgage equals an amount that is substantially less than what is needed to buy a comparable house in the area, the subrecipient should discuss with the applicant and have a plan in place with the applicant to move forward, such as incentives, another mortgage, etc. After inputting the documentation in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the documentation, and any comments on the documentation or its location. In number 13, subrecipients should provide flood insurance documentation if required. If the applicant has indicated on the intake beneficiary application that the property is in a special flood hazard area, they should have flood insurance on the property, and they will need to provide a copy of the flood insurance policy documentation as proof of insurance to input in the file. When reviewing that information, subrecipients should ensure that the name of the applicant is on the policy as well as the address of the damaged property. If the homeowner is located in a special flood hazard area and they do not currently have insurance, further information to determine their eligibility is needed. Subrecipients should document and justify why the homeowner has not maintained flood and/or windstorm insurance, if the property is inhabitable, if the homeowner is considered NCOMP with FEMA, if the homeowner is LMI. The homeowner may be eligible if they will relocate outside of a high-risk flood area. However, the subrecipient should contact their GLO grant manager. The GLO will review these homeowners for eligibility on a case-by-case basis. After inputting the documentation in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the documentation and any comments on the documentation or its location. In number 14, subrecipients should input documentation of ownership on the property and unit. If the applicant indicated on the application that they are seeking a buyout or acquisition for a manufactured housing unit, MHU, they must provide a statement of ownership form, and the property must be selected as real property on the statement of ownership. However, please note that Texas law states that as of September 1, 2003, all titles became statements of ownership. The property will accept titles that identify the property as real property. The statement of ownership or title provided should indicate that the property is real property. The applicant file should also have a copy or photo of the CAD property search results that indicate the property type is real. For any other property type, the homeowner will need to provide a deed and/or title abstract for the home, and it must be in the applicant's name. If there are any other names on the deed for the damaged property, those additional names should be listed as co-applicants on the application, or if there is more names on the deed than an applicant and co-applicant, additional names on the deed will need to complete and attach applications. After inputting the documentation in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the documentation, and any comments on the documentation or its location. In number 15, subrecipients should input the GLO form well abandonment certification. All applicants must provide a signed copy of the form in their file whether it applies to the applicant or not. If the homeowner does not have a well on the buyout or acquisition property, they can complete the owner and address information in number 2 and the certification and signature in number 9, and then place an NA in all of the other sections. If there is a well on the property and the well has been previously abandoned, the form will need to be completed in its entirety by the homeowner prior to applicant eligibility. If there is a well on the property, but the well has not yet been abandoned, the homeowner will need to fill out the form to the best of their ability, sign it, and leave the completion of the form to the demolition contractor when they abandon the well at demolition. The form will therefore not be completed when it is originally placed in the file for eligibility review. However, subrecipients should ensure that sections 1 through 5 and 9 have been completed on the form for review. At demolition, the demolition contractors should complete the form and an updated form should be placed in the file. See the instructional video on the well abandonment certification for more information. For our example, the applicant has not yet abandoned the well and it will be abandoned at demolition. The applicant then completed sections 1 through 5 and section 9, and the subrecipient placed it in the file, checked yes, and input the page numbers where the form can be found and that the well has not yet been abandoned. In number 16, subrecipients should input the GLO form Hazardous Material Disclosure Certification. All applicants of the Voluntary Buyout or Acquisition Program must complete the Hazardous Material Disclosure Certification. See the instructional video on the Hazardous Material Disclosure Certification for more information on completing the form. After inputting the form in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the form and any comments on the form or its location. In number 17, the subrecipient should document proof of the property to be demolished, which should include current photos of the home and scope of work to demolish. The file should also include a work write-up or cost estimate of the demolition. The GLO understands that at this point, a demolition contractor may not have been procured. However, the file should include a work write-up or cost estimate to demonstrate estimates of the cost of the property to be demolished. Subrecipients should ensure that the estimated cost to be demolished is equal to or less than the amount budgeted per home in the Table 2 of the application. If the amount is substantially higher than what was budgeted per home, a justification should be placed in the file on how the subrecipient has budgeted for the work. A sample work write-up has been placed in the supplemental documentation on the GLO's Buyout and Acquisition website. This is a sample document and should be altered to meet the program's needs. See the instructional video on the sample work write-up. After inputting the photos and work write-up, The subrecipient should check yes, no, or NA that they input the documentation in the file and any comments on the documentation or its location. In number 18, the subrecipient is required to provide environmental review information for the property. In the first row, the subrecipient should input in the comment column the date the broad environmental review was completed. In the next row, the subrecipient is required to input all site-specific review information, including the site-specific review form that was submitted to the GLO and the confirmation email from the GLO approving the site-specific review. For applicants that do not complete a tiered environmental review, documentation of when the environmental review was completed and all information specific to that site must be placed into the file. In number 19, subrecipients are required to provide documentation of an achievable, clear title at closing. Homes with clouded titles are ineligible for the program. Subrecipients must ensure that the applicant's property titles can be cleared at closing and provide proof of that. This can be done using the title abstract, which can also be used as proof of ownership, or a title commitment. The GLO understands that at this point in the process, the title may not be clear. However, no issues should be present on the title that may not be worked out by closing. If title issues are present, a plan should be placed in the file of how the subrecipient and applicant will work to clear the title at closing. After inputting the documentation in the file, subrecipients should check yes, no, or NA if they included the documentation and any comments on the documentation or its location. The last and final section of the left side documentation checklist lists supplemental documentation that should be input in the file if they are applicable. While not all documents in the supplemental section are applicable to every applicant, if they are applicable to the applicant, they should be placed in the file. If they are not applicable, the checklist should note that the items are NA. The first supplemental document is the sample homeowner application denial letter. All applicants deemed ineligible or that will be denied participation in the program must be sent an application denial letter from the subrecipient. The file should contain a copy of that letter and evidence of delivery. The denial letter should clearly state the reason for the denial and appeal rights. The GLO has provided on the buyout and acquisition webpage a sample letter. This letter is a sample only. Subrecipients are required to alter the letter to meet their program's needs while meeting the purpose of the letter. See the instructional video on the homeowner application denial letter for more information. If applicable, in addition to the letter, supporting documentation should be filled as to the reason for the application denial. In our example, the subrecipient placed NA on the checklist and commented that the application has not been denied. The next supplemental document provided is the homeowner appeal form. All subrecipients must have a homeowner appeal form for which applicants can file a complaint, appeal, or dispute determination with the program. The GLO has provided on the buyout and acquisition webpage a sample form. This form is a sample only. Subrecipients are required to alter the form to meet their program's needs while meeting the purpose of the form. See the instructional video on the homeowner appeal for more information. In addition to the form, documentation for each complaint or appeal must be maintained by the subrecipient. Each file that contains an appeal must include the following: contact information for the complainant, initial complaint, address and GLO assigned project number if applicable, any communications to and from complainant or appellant, results of the investigation together with any notes, letters, or other investigative documentation, the date the complaint or appeal was closed, and any other action taken. Subrecipients should also ensure that they are following their program guidelines in regard to receiving and responding to appeals, complaints, and disputes. Subrecipients should then update the checklist and check yes, no, or NA if they included the documentation and any comments on the documentation or its location. The next supplemental document provided is the sample homeowner letter of withdrawal. All subrecipients with voluntary buyout and acquisition programs must have a homeowner letter of withdrawal for which applicants officially withdraw from the program. The GLO has provided on the buyout and acquisition webpage a sample letter. This letter is a sample only. Subrecipients are required to alter the letter to meet their program's needs while also meeting the purpose of the form. See the instructional video on the sample homeowner letter of withdrawal for more information. In our example, the subrecipient input NA, applicant has not withdrawn on the checklist. In the next two rows, subrecipients should input documentation of their voluntary acquisition notice sent to the homeowners to comply with URA requirements for voluntary buyouts or acquisitions. URA regulations require that voluntary buyouts or acquisitions comply with voluntary notification requirements to homeowners. There are two types of voluntary acquisition notices: voluntary acquisition notices for agencies with eminent domain, and voluntary acquisition notices for agencies without eminent domain. The regulations vary slightly depending on whether the agency, otherwise known as the subrecipient, has the powers of eminent domain. For subrecipients with the power of eminent domain, voluntary acquisitions or buyouts are only eligible if all of the requirements of 49 CFR 24-101B 1I through IV are met. The requirements for voluntary programs run by agencies with eminent domain include: no specific site or property needs to be acquired, although the agency may limit its search for alternative sites to a general geographic area. Where an agency wishes to purchase more than one site within a general geographic area on this basis, all owners are to be treated similarly. See Appendix A, 24-101-B1I. The property to be acquired is not part of an intended, planned, or designated project area where all or substantially all of the property within the area is to be acquired within specific time limits. The agency will not acquire the property if negotiations fail to result in an amicable agreement and the owner is so informed in writing. The agency will inform the owner in writing of what it believes to be the market value of the property. See Appendix A, 24-101-B1IV and 2II. The requirements for voluntary programs run by agencies without eminent domain include: prior to making an offer for the property, clearly advise the owner that it is unable to acquire the property if negotiations fail to result in an agreement, and inform the owner in writing of what it believes to be the market value of the property. A letter should be sent to the homeowner informing them of these rights under a voluntary acquisition program. The letter should clearly state that the subrecipient has or does not have powers of eminent domain and will not be using those powers. The checklist provides sample notices created by HUD to comply with these requirements. The sample HUD Handbook 1378 Appendix 31 Voluntary Acquisition Information Notice, Agencies Without Eminent Domain Authority, and the sample HUD Handbook 1378 Appendix 32 Voluntary Acquisition Information Notice, Agencies with Eminent Domain Authority. These forms are sample documents and should be edited to meet the program's needs. The file should contain a copy of the notice sent and evidence of delivery. See the instructional videos on the voluntary acquisition information notices with and without eminent domain authority for more information on the forms. The subrecipient should then complete the file by selecting Yes, No, or NA for the document being in the file and any comments on the document. For our example, the subrecipient placed NA and the comment Agency has eminent domain in the row for agencies without eminent domain. In the row for agencies with eminent domain, the subrecipient input Yes and the pages where the letter can be found. The final item in row 20 is the sample work write-up. This is a sample document provided by the GLO to provide an example of a demolition work write-up that is required for number 17. This is a sample document and meant to be altered to meet the program's needs. The completed document should be placed in number 17 in the file. On the checklist, the subrecipient placed Yes that the work write-up was in the file and included in the comments the location of the work write-up. The final supplemental document provided is number 21. This is an instructional guide that gives information on how to demonstrate the location of the buyout or acquisition property overlaid with the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area map, as is required for number 10 on the checklist. See the instructional video on how to indicate the property's location in flood zone for more information. The map should be placed with the document for number 10 in the checklist. Finally, the subrecipient should input yes, no, or NA that the form was added to the file and comment on the location of the map. We hope you enjoyed this training on the Voluntary Buyout and Acquisition Left Side Documentation Checklist. If there are any additional questions during the completion of this form, subrecipients should reach out to their General Land Office Grant Manager. Additional videos covering the other required local buyout and acquisition forms are, or soon will be, available at the same location you